Welcome back to TalkTickers. Usually we dive deep into earnings calls, but today we're doing something a little different. Given the recent Israeli airstrikes inside Iran, we really felt it was important to, dedicate some time to understanding this.
Yeah.
Especially given the potential for global economic fallout.
Yeah, it's certainly a significant development. And I think to grasp the gravity of this, you really need to understand the history of the Iran-Israel conflict. It's a crucial context for analyzing, the potential for further escalation.
Absolutely. And, it's important to remember these airstrikes didn't just come out of nowhere. There's been a sort of escalating series of actions and reactions. It started with Iran's ballistic missile attacks on Israel back on October 1st. And those were themselves a response to, Israeli actions against Hezbollah in Lebanon. So it's really a complex web of interconnected events with a very long and complicated history.
It is. This proxy conflict between Iran and Israel. It's been simmering for almost 40 years now, sometimes more intense, sometimes less, but always deeply rooted in ideology and fueled by this complex network of proxy groups operating throughout the region.
So to really unpack what's happening right now, we need to look at that history. What would you say are the key events and turning points, the things that have really shaped this conflict into what we see today?
Well, it might surprise you to learn, but the relationship between Iran and Israel wasn't always this antagonistic. Before the 1979 Islamic Revolution, they actually had a fairly warm relationship, driven by some shared concerns at the time. Things like Nasserism, the Soviet Union, a strong Iraq. There were even some discussions of a potential alliance, believe it or not.
Wow, it really goes to show how much things can change, doesn't it? So what was the catalyst for this shift towards conflict?
The 1979 Islamic Revolution. That was the real turning point, this new Iranian regime. With its revolutionary ideology, it viewed Israel as a symbol of Western imperialism in the region and fundamentally illegitimate. This then led to Iranian support for Palestinian groups like Hezbollah and Hamas, both of which, of course, are designated as terrorist organizations by Israel.
So this fundamental ideological clash is really at the core of everything.
Precisely. On the one hand, you have Iran advocating for a one-state solution, which would essentially replace Israel. And on the other hand, you have Israel, viewing Iran as an existential threat, especially given their pursuit of nuclear weapons.
And this isn't just a conflict playing out directly between two nations, is it? The fact that these proxy groups are involved makes things so much more complicated.
Absolutely. It's one of the defining features of this conflict, this web of proxies operating across the region. Iran supports groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, various Shia militias in Syria and Iraq. These groups act as extensions of Iranian influence, directly challenging Israeli interests, and frequently engaging in violence, with devastating consequences for civilians, unfortunately.
It's like a multi-dimensional chess game almost,
Yeah.
with incredibly high stakes. And to really understand how this could escalate even further, I think it's helpful to look back at some of the key events that have shaped its trajectory so far, sort of understand the cyclical nature of this conflict.
Right. Well, a good starting point might be the 1982 Israeli invasion of Lebanon. Israel's goal was to expel the PLO, but it sort of had the unintended consequence of actually strengthening Hezbollah and really set the stage for future conflicts.
And then that escalated significantly in 2006 with the Lebanon War, didn't it?
Yes. The 2006 Lebanon War was a month of intense fighting between Israel and Hezbollah. And it's important to note, there were reports of Iranian Revolutionary Guard operatives directly involved in that fighting, including firing rockets into Israel. So it really underscores the potential for direct Iranian involvement in this conflict, even if it's often veiled.
Right. And this conflict also operates in the shadows, with covert operations playing a big role.
Absolutely. In the 2010s, there was this series of assassinations targeting Iranian nuclear scientists. While never officially acknowledged, these were widely attributed to Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency. Iran then retaliated, allegedly orchestrating attacks against Israeli and Jewish targets around the world. So it was this period of really heightened tension and clandestine warfare.
And then, as if this conflict didn't have enough layers already, the Syrian civil war became another battleground for this proxy conflict.
Yeah, exactly. Both Iran and Israel became deeply entangled in the Syrian civil war, backing opposing factions. Iran supported the Assad regime, while Israel conducted numerous airstrikes targeting Iranian assets in Syria. These recent Israeli airstrikes inside Iran can really be viewed as a continuation of that involvement and a pretty significant escalation.
And of course, we can't overlook the ongoing Israel-Hamas war and the escalating tensions throughout the region as a whole. It seems like all of these conflicts are interconnected, feeding off of each other, contributing to a very volatile environment.
They are. And this recent attack on Israel by Hamas, which is believed to have been coordinated with Iran, that's a major driver of the current escalation. It's significantly raised the stakes and created a situation that could potentially draw in other countries, further destabilizing the region.
Which brings us to the international implications of these latest Israeli airstrikes, because this isn't just something that's happening in a vacuum. It's unfolding on a global stage and could have some pretty big consequences for international relations.
Right. The U.S., for example, was informed of the strikes, but they've expressed their disapproval. So this adds another layer of complexity to everything, because it could potentially strain the crucial U.S.-Israel relationship, particularly given, what's happening in Gaza.
Okay, so what about some of the other key players, like Russia and Saudi Arabia? How do their interests sort of align or diverge from those of Israel and Iran?
Well, it's a very complex web of alliances and rivalries. Russia, for example, they're increasingly aligned with Iran, but they have their own strategic interests to consider. Back in 2019, for example, Russia rejected Iranian requests for S-400 missile defense systems. So this kind of illustrates the limits of even seemingly strong partnerships, especially in the face of, geopolitical calculations.
What about Saudi Arabia? How are they viewing this situation?
Well, Saudi Arabia, being a Sunni-majority country, they have a long-standing rivalry with Shia-majority Iran. They see Iran's expanding influence in the region as a direct threat to their own security and interests, of course.
Right, so that adds yet another layer of tension to an already volatile situation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so stepping back from all the geopolitical complexities for a moment, what does all this mean for the global economy? And more importantly, for our listeners, what does it mean for the financial markets?
Well, in the short term, I think the most immediate impact is going to be increased market volatility. We're already seeing this reflected in the surge of the ProShares Ultra VIX short-term futures ETF. That's UVXY, by the way. It's a key indicator of market volatility.
Right, that makes sense. Fear and uncertainty always seem to lead to market fluctuations. What about the potential impact on specific sectors? What should investors be paying close attention to right now?
Energy is definitely one to watch. These strikes were pretty close to Iranian oil installations, and any disruption to Iranian oil production or export, well, that could have significant consequences for global energy markets and oil prices, of course.
Yeah, that's a concerning prospect. Given the current global energy landscape, what about other sectors? Are there any that stand out to you in terms of potential impact?
Well, defense is another one that's likely to be affected. Increased military spending by both sides and their allies. That could benefit defense contractors globally. We may see an uptick in demand for military hardware and technology as these tensions continue to rise.
Right, and in this age of escalating geopolitical tensions, I imagine cybersecurity is becoming increasingly important too.
It is. These recent cyber attacks on Iranian banks, they highlight how vulnerable critical infrastructure can be during times like these. So cybersecurity firms could definitely see increased demand for their services as governments and businesses try to strengthen their defenses.
So it sounds like this situation presents both risks and opportunities for investors.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment, and it really underscores how important it is for investors to carefully consider geopolitical risks as part of their investment decisions, especially when it comes to regions like the Middle East, with its long history of complex and volatile situations.
So it seems like understanding these geopolitical events and their potential impact, that's becoming more and more important for investors who want to make informed decisions.
Absolutely. In the past, investors may have been able to overlook conflicts in distant parts of the world. But in today's interconnected global economy, that's just not a viable strategy anymore. Geopolitical events can have a ripple effect that extends far beyond their immediate location, influencing market trends and impact investments across the board.
So investors really need to become more geopolitically aware.
Precisely. Developing a deeper understanding of the dynamics of these conflicts, the motivations of the players involved, and the potential economic ramifications. That's essential.
So it sounds like investors almost need to become amateur historians and political analysts.
In a way, yeah. But it's not about becoming an expert on
Uh-huh.
on every global hotspot. It's more about developing a framework for understanding how these events can how they can ripple through markets and affect investments.
Okay, so where can investors go to develop that framework? Are there any specific resources you'd recommend?
There are lots of excellent resources available these days. Reputable news sources like, well, the Associated Press, Reuters, the New York Times, they provide a solid foundation. And then for more in-depth analysis on specific conflicts, you can look into academic journals and think tanks. Those can be very informative.
What about financial news outlets? How effectively do they cover these geopolitical events and their potential market impact?
Well, financial news outlets, they're great at reporting on,
Yeah.
market movements, but they often lack the depth and nuance when it comes to geopolitical analysis. So investors need to be discerning consumers of information, gathering insights from a variety of sources, critically evaluating what they read, and avoiding basing their investment decisions solely on headlines.
Great advice. Okay, so before we wrap up this deep dive
Yeah.
into the Israeli airstrikes and this broader Iran-Israel conflict, I want to kind of bring it back to the core focus of TalkTickers. We've delved into the geopolitical side of things, but our listeners are primarily interested in the financial implications.
Right, of course. And I think the key takeaway for investors is that, geopolitical risks, these aren't just abstract concepts. They're tangible forces that can significantly impact market dynamics and their investment portfolio. So understanding these risks is not optional anymore. It's essential.
So how should investors be thinking um,
hmm
about positioning themselves in light of this escalation?
Well, it's crucial to maintain a balanced and diversified portfolio while being mindful of potential sector-specific impacts. As we discussed, energy and defense are likely to experience volatility, and cybersecurity might see increased demand. Investors should also consider the broader impact on market sentiment, which tends to become more risk-averse during times like these.
So it sounds like staying informed and being adaptable is more important than ever.
Absolutely. This is a fluid and complex situation, and the ultimate impact on the markets, well, it's going to depend on a multitude of factors, many of which are still unfolding.
So as we wrap up this special episode of Talk Tickers,
Yeah.
focusing on the Israeli airstrikes inside Iran and the broader implications for the global economy and the markets, what would you say is the most important piece of advice for our listeners right now?
I'd say stay informed, exercise caution, and try to maintain a long-term perspective. The situation is it's likely to continue unfolding for quite some time, potentially weeks, months, even years. So it's really important to avoid making any impulsive reactions to headlines and instead really focus on developing a solid understanding of the underlying dynamics at play.
Wise words. And remember, here at Talk Tickers, we always try to provide our listeners with the knowledge and insights they need to navigate the complexities of the market, whether we're analyzing earnings calls or dissecting geopolitical events like this, events that could have a real impact on their portfolios.
Just stay tuned, stay informed, and as always, invest wisely.
Thanks for joining us for this special episode of Talk Tickers. We'll be back next week with our regular coverage of earnings calls. But until then, stay safe, stay informed, and we'll see you next time.
Until next time.